Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shanti Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shanti Shantireva Shanti Shantirme Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Shanti 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 Harihi Om.
We will sing 6 stanzas on Nirvana on page 17.
Thank you.
Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayedhi Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Te Namam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Our subject today is questions about the world. It's quite possible that religious consciousness or religion and spirituality may well have begun in this world through questions, starting with the world that we see around us. It seems very natural that at some point in human history, we began asking questions about the world. Beyond just what is this or how did this happen, more fundamental questions such as when did it all begin? Does this world have any ultimate purpose? Who made this world? And where is it going? What does it have an end? Kind of things like that. And it also seems inevitable that in course of time, this questioning about the world evolved into then asking questions about the person who was experiencing the world. And then that led to more questions about, well, besides me, that is every one of us, and the world, is there anyone or anything else? Which then, of course, brings in the idea of the transcendent, God. So, Whenever we study a religious tradition, these are the three primary elements in it. There is the individual who is experiencing the world, every one of us. Then there is the world in which we live. And then there is this transcendent aspect to it. Commonly, of course, in English, when we speak about it, we refer to that transcendent truth or being as God. So me, God, and the world. And what makes one tradition different from another tradition is the different ways the interrelationships between these three entities is explained. Because we need a kind of a conceptual framework to place these three things: the person, the world, and God. How are they related, and so on. And that's what, beginning this week, we are looking at questions about the world. And in next week, we will see about the questions about the person. And then a week following that one, we will see about questions about God. So this month, we'll try to deal with questions. And I think I would like to say something about questions themselves. You know, all of us, if we have seen that right from the time we are born, see, to a newborn, there aren't that many questions, only when we because to a newborn baby, the world is simply a string of sensations, just sights, sounds, and gradually, as we start getting older, these sounds and sights and smells and tastes begin to make some sense. And then language skill develops. It's then, at some stage, and for different people it might be at different times, but more or less when we are, maybe those of you who are parents probably would know the answer to this in a more accurate way. Maybe even they are 1 year old or 2 year old, some small questions, and then kind of the questioning kind of evolves as we grow older. Questioning itself plays an important role in the life of every spiritual seeker. And sooner or later we realize that while it may not be possible, it's usually not possible to get answers to all questions immediately. And today we seem to think that because of the availability of Google, well, we can get answer to it immediately, but even Google can't answer all questions. We know that. I mean, at the most, it might give us some information without even there's no way to know on the internet what information we get, how authentic it is. There is no objective way to test it. But a lot of these questions, the basic questions about life, they may not have immediate answers. And because we may not have immediate answers to it, if we stop asking those questions, then we won't learn anything. So life is not really so much about getting answers, it's about framing the right question. So whatever questions we have, all that we need to do is keep on refining them, even if we don't get the answer. And in order for us to refine our questions, we must know what we don't know. It's like this. Questions are always about what we don't know. Well, if we already have an answer, then there is no question about it. So if we are asking a question, it's a question about something that we don't know. But how clearly do we know what we don't know? I don't know whether this makes sense. So we are ignorant about something, but how clearly do we know what we are ignorant about? And so the more we try to refine our understanding of what we don't know, automatically our question itself will get refined. And a Vedanta teacher under whom I studied for many years once said, and it makes complete sense, he said, we keep on refining the question more and more and more, And a time will be reached, we will find that the answer is embedded in the question itself. And so it's just a process of continually refining our questions. Many of you would have already heard about what's often described as the Socratic method. And that's the kind of method that Socrates employed to engage the other person by asking questions, so that the answer would emerge. Socrates himself wouldn't give the answer, but he would keep on asking one question after another, and so that the answer would emerge from the person who was being questioned. And that's why he often described his own role as that of being a midwife, that he doesn't answer your question, but he will nudge us towards an answer by asking questions. And that's something that we can do to ourselves. So we can keep on asking these questions to ourselves, and the answers would emerge. That is Vedanta's insight we get, that the answers are not really in books, they are not anywhere outside. Knowledge is already within us. And the more we are able to uncover the dross of ignorance, if you like, and knowledge would automatically emerge from within. And that is why Vedanta encourages us to ask questions fearlessly. Sri Ramakrishna never stopped his disciples from asking any question. He said, test me in every way you can. Because his point was, truth is not afraid of anything. Truth can stand the light, the daylight. So truth is very transparent, and truth gives that fearlessness. So then, as we grow older and start asking questions, what are the kind of questions that can come to the mind, especially of a spiritual seeker? And spiritual seeker is such a broad category. So I'm primarily speaking about someone who sooner or later might turn to the kind of approach many of us are familiar with in Vedanta. But one obvious question obviously would be about the world. Well, what is the world? And the world is a very tricky word, because we use it all the time, but not all of us use it always in the same sense. Physically, of course, the world can often mean the extent of this material universe, the kind of universe that is known to cosmologists and astrophysicists. We say, well, that's world. But oftentimes, the word often gets used to refer to the natural forces in the world. And sometimes to just living beings, and more specifically to human beings. So when we say, what is this world coming to? Or in the world in which we live. You see, we are using the word world, but sometimes we just mean the planet Earth. Sometimes we mean nature. So we mean different things, although we use the same word to use it. But very often, what most of us mean by world most of the time is an entity which is much smaller. And if we look at our life, we will see that by and large, mostly, once our life kind of falls into a certain routine, it moves within a relatively smaller geographical area, and there is only a certain number of people we tend to meet. Usually, if you in a workplace, the people who work with you, of course, you're members of your family, then the neighborhood, and then occasional groups or religious places of worship or clubs or games that you attend to. And so these are the kind of a specific social groups of which we are a part. These are the people we meet. And so whenever we generally refer to the world, it is to these places, the shopping mall and wherever we go to, and the repetitive chore of duties that we do. That's our own little bubble. And that's the world that we usually refer to. Occasionally, we might kind of step out of this world a little bit, On the outer fringes of our world will be um, the things that we see on television or what we read about in the news about what's happening in some distant parts of the world. But it's still very hazy compared to this kind of very real world, the little bubble we are encountering every day. Now, this world that we generally refer to is primarily very self-referential. In other words, only that which I'm directly acquainted with or something that I'm directly affected by becomes the extent of my world. If there are things happening in the world outside which don't make any difference to me, I may kind of know about it, but I rarely think about it. It's completely irrelevant. Think about it this way. Whatever is happening in the outer fringes of our own galaxy, forget about the other galaxies. There are cataclysmic events occurring there. But who cares? Most of the time, we don't even know. But well, this hurricane that is affecting now that which recently in Puerto Rico and Florida and Texas, they are affected because it is so visible, it's so close. But even then, we are not as affected by the people who are actually there. And if there are hurricanes somewhere in some distant part of even our own planet, and if we are not affected by it, it doesn't so much concern us. So you can see the world kind of is a very hazy idea in some ways if you begin to think about it in this way. And that is why, because the world is self-referential, we may not always be experiencing the same world. How often we have seen a person say, how terrible this world is, and then someone else says, oh, how wonderful this world is. And we begin to wonder whether they both live in the same world. Sometimes these could be the statement of the same person on 2 different days. And so every day we may not be living in the same world our own selves, because sometimes the same place appears terrible and some other time it appears terrific. Now, the reason it looks different is because the world that we experience, we do it through the lens of our own mind. And our mind is rarely constant or unchanging. Sometimes when the mind is in a happy mood, everything around seems happy. Sometimes when the mind is a little down, everything seems a bit dark. And because the colors of our mind keep changing, the world around also seems to keep changing. Now that's this one question that can come about the world is, well, what is the world? And these are the possible answers that can emerge from it. A second question that can come, but doesn't come in the mind of most people, I would think, is this world real? Because if you ask this question, I mean, most of you are familiar with the way Vedanta students think. But otherwise, if you just go to someone who has never heard of this concept and say, is the world real? They'll think there's something really wrong with you, because it appears so obvious that this world is real. So even ask that question seems very absurd, even very crazy in some ways to even question the reality of the world. And the reason for that is very few have tried to ask the question, well, how do I define reality? How can I say something is real? And if you begin to ask a question like that, we might discover that our notion of reality is not very clear in our own heads. Because oftentimes we might say that the world is real because I experience it. I see things here. All of my senses attest to the reality of the world. Now, just because I'm able to see it, hear it, smell it, touch it, everything here, say, well, how can I say this is unreal? It appears so real. You can hear the sound. Now, if that's the only answer I have to prove its reality, then it's not enough. Because even in my dream, I can see this, and in my dream, I can tap on it, And in the dream also it will make the same sound. And yet, if I'm asked, well, what I saw in my dream, was it real? I'll say, no, that can't be real. It's only a dream. So the very reason I gave to prove the reality of this, that reason was present in the dream, and I'm able to dismiss the dream as unreal while this as real. So there is something clearly missing, something really not very logical in the way we think about reality. Now, we might say, well, the reality of the dream world is completely out of the question because, well, the dream didn't exist before I went to sleep, and the dream doesn't exist after I wake up in the morning. It seems to exist. Clearly, of course, when we are dreaming, most of us, most of the time, when we are in the dream, we don't know it's a dream. It's a very real world to us then. And so we know the dream to be a dream only when we wake up. But because the dream did not exist before I fell asleep, and it does not exist after I wake up, so it had a kind of a very limited existence, if you want to call it existence. So because that existence was very limited, it's easy for me to say dream is not real. On the contrary, this world in which we are now is very persistent. It's not very limited because, well, I wake up, it's the same world again next day. But every night I go to sleep, I don't see the same dream. That's one way of distinguishing dreams from the waking world. But again, if we are not simply satisfied with this way of thinking, we might want to explore it further. And that is this, that when I dream, do I know that it's a new dream? No dream appears to be a new dream because only when we wake up, then we might say, well, yesterday's dream was different from the dream I had 2 nights ago. But in the dream, it appears to be the same world that we saw. Also, the way I like to sometimes think about it, let's say you go to sleep at, say, 11 o'clock, 11 p.m. And then by about 11:10, 10 minutes past, you are fast asleep. Not many people are that much lucky to fall asleep within 10 minutes, but let's kind of suppose, at least theoretically, after 10 minutes, you are fast asleep. By 5 minutes later, that's 15 minutes after you went to sleep, by 11:15, you've already entered a dream. So by 11:20, 5 minutes into the dream, if someone were to ask you, how old is this world? What will you say? What chances are there that you will say, well, this world is only 5 minutes old? Because the mountains and trees and everything that we see in the dream would seem to have existed for long. And maybe in the dream we might then hold forth with Big Bang and string theory and say how old this world is and how many millions of years, etc. But we know, well, it's only 5 minutes old. So just as we might enter into a new world which is only a few minutes old, and it might appear to be like a world that the only world we have lived in, the only world that we know, and yet when we wake up, we encounter this world, which also seems like, wow, there was this Big Bang, or there are whatever new theories that we can come up with. How do we, it's not necessary for the world to be objectively millions of years old. It could be just 5 minutes old, and yet might seem to be a long time existing. And so we gradually begin to see that there is not that much difference between dream and waking. It's pretty much same. If dreams did not exist before I fell asleep, and if dreams end when I wake up, then we can say this world did not exist after I went to sleep. And this world seemed to exist only from the time I woke up till I fall asleep. So this really means, does the world exist when I am asleep? And the answer to that would be, well, it may not exist for me, but not everyone in the world was asleep. There were other people who were awake when I was sleeping. And so the world existed for them. And so their testimony proves that the world existed even when I was asleep. Even this thinking is really not very logical, in the sense that then we have to apply the same criteria to the people I meet in my dreams. So let's go back to the dream I saw, and the dream which started at 11:15. So 5 minutes later, I may have been into that world for only 5 minutes, but what about the other people I meet in that world? So those other people I met in my dream, how long were there in that world? So did the dream world already exist and I just kind of jumped into it at 11:15, or the world started at 11:15? After I wake up, does the whole dream world disappear, or it's only that I get out of it, but the other people I meet in my dream are continuing in that world? In other words, what I'm suggesting is, are we willing to concede that there are in fact many worlds, one of which we say is the waking world, and all these other worlds, and we kind of pop in and out of them at will? That doesn't seem to make sense either. So what would be, if we want to be use a more accurate language to what we are experiencing, it might be more accurate to say that the world exists for me as long as I'm aware of it, just as the dream exists for me as long as I'm aware of it. So the dream world is real for me as long as I'm dreaming, and the waking world is real for me as long as I'm awake. But there is no objective way to prove or disprove whether the dream existed before I fell asleep or not, or whether this world exists after I fell asleep or not. So these are the problems when we deal with the reality of the world. Now, none of this really proves that the world, I'm not suggesting that the world is unreal or anything. All that I'm saying is, it is possible to raise reasonable doubts about it. So it's possible to be, we don't have to be dogmatic about either position. We don't have to be dogmatic that this world is real or that this world is not real. Neither is necessary. We just have to make sure that we are accurate in what we say. And I think it'll be difficult to disagree with the statement that there is no way to prove that the world is real while we are in the world, or the way to prove that the dream is unreal when we are in the dream. So that's the situation. Now, one other question that could come, not a question really, is that one of the reasons that we say dreams are unreal, because when we wake up, the world that we see somehow feels more real than the dream that just ended. What in effect we are saying, although that's not how we may not always put it that way, that the reality of this world is somehow more real than the seeming reality of the dream that I saw last night. So, in effect, we are accepting levels of reality. That the dream had kind of reality last night when I saw it, but this world is kind of more real than that. Again, if we want to be consistent and if we want to be logical, then if this world is more real than the dream, then we must at least accept the possibility that there could be something more real than this world. If this waking experience is somehow more tangible, more intense, if you like, then we have to accept the possibility that something could be more tangible, more intense, more powerful than even the waking experience. And in Vedanta they say that if we believe in a transcendent being or a transcendent reality, something beyond, then that something beyond would be more real than this world. Just as this world is more real than the dream, the reality of God is more real than this world. In fact, that is exactly what Sri Ramakrishna told Vivekananda as a young man when he, just like we are trying to, at least trying to think logically about these things, he as a young college student had this question, well, is God real? Religious books have spoken about God for centuries. But is it only a concept? Is it only something in theory? Or is it just a kind of a belief? And if God is real, has anyone seen God? And so we read in Vivekananda's life, as a young man, he went about meeting the religious leaders of his time who lived in that area, asking them this question, have you seen God? He didn't ask them, is God real? It was more direct, have you seen God? And the answer that he got from Ramakrishna was so powerful, as he described it later. Vivekananda said, Ramakrishna just looked at him and said, yes, I've seen God. And then he went on to say, you can see him too. Further, and this is the important statement, what Ramakrishna told him was, I see God more clearly than I see you, in a more intenser sense. Now that I would like to draw your attention to that it wasn't as if Ramakrishna wasn't seeing this world. Of course he saw this world. And very likely when he slept, he may have seen some dreams as well. But his experience of the spirit, his experience of that transcendent reality, he described as saying is more real, more intense. So if we want to have at least some answer to the question of what may the reality of God be, at least we have one possible way of describing it, and that is someone or something that is more real than this. And the outcome of that would be this. Just as the dream appears real when I am dreaming, but becomes kind of like almost like a shadow, almost unreal after I wake up, the same thing will happen once I experience God. That not that the memory of this world will go, but compared to the reality of the divine, this world will appear merely as a shadow, merely something think about it this way. If now on our computers you have pictures on your desktop, you can select whatever picture you want, and sometimes there are beautiful options available, some pictures of nature and so on. Now, and those pictures are spectacular, wonderful pictures. But then if you are sitting near a window and you are looking out of your window, and if you're fortunate enough to have a good view outside the window, then you are encountering nature there, and you are encountering nature on your desktop picture as well. Both are nature, but somehow what you see outside the window appears more real than what you see on your computer screen. In the same way, when we encounter the spiritual reality, this world will appear to be something on a computer screen. And with now augmented reality coming in, it's easy to believe this world doesn't have to be simply two-dimensional to seem real. So now with all this 3D coming in, this could be an augmented reality, but not really real. But we can say that. At present, this is simply theoretical. At present, it's simply kind of a logical way of thinking. But when we experience it, we will no longer doubt it. Right now, even if we are able to think about it logically, questions will still come. It might seem like, well, this seems to make sense, but what is the proof that it is really like this? And as they say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So if and when, it's not really a question of if. What Vedanta says is, it's not, it's one day every one of us will be in touch with that higher reality. And when we do, then this world will not disappear, but will somehow appear less real. And that's why, as I sometimes like to say, if you don't want this world to become less real, don't be in a hurry to realize God. Because there is a very ancient Vedantic verse which says that an enlightened being, one who has experienced spiritual freedom, in one sense is not free. In which sense is that person not free? That is, once you attain freedom, you don't have the freedom to say, no, for some time I would still like to stay in bondage a little bit longer. Sorry, that's too late. So the Sanskrit says, sa nechan api muchyate. Such a person, na icchan api. Even if this person, after attaining enlightenment, says, I don't want to be liberated. He said, no, whether you like it or not now, you will be. And that's why beware of what you are getting into. If you are really striving for enlightenment, whether you really want to be free from this. Now, one other point, this could sound a little bit scary in some sense, and it is this, that it's not as if this is going to go away completely. In fact, this will become more meaningful. We will see truth as it really is. And the truth as it really is more beautiful than the world that we encounter now. Even if we see wonderful things in the world, none of those things are going to go away. But after we realize God, this will be invested with even greater meaning, greater joy, greater depth. There is a beautiful verse in the writings of a great monk. His name was Madhusudan Saraswati. I'm not very sure. It's probably around 16th or 17th century, I think. He was a great non-dualist, but also a great devotee of Krishna. And so he is an enlightened being, and he has written commentaries on the Gita and so on. And then there is one verse which he says that Krishna appeared very beautiful, but then he says, after now I've realized the oneness of everything, the beauty of Krishna is even enhanced even further. And so do not imagine when we speak about oneness and everything as if all this is going to go away, and then what? What am I going to do? I'm just going to get bored into that oneness. No, oneness will not be boring. Everything will appear even more meaningful, more beautiful than it was. That's the testimony of those who have already reached that state. We see in the life of Ramakrishna himself how filled with joy he was. And that was the joy and bliss he could impart to those around him. So while diversity and variety can be wonderful, oneness, understood in this sense, can be even more wonderful than that. And finally, this one last question and I close. It is this: does the world have any ultimate purpose? Now, as I said in the beginning, this question is very difficult to answer because it inevitably brings us to the person who is experiencing the world, every one of us, because we live and we die here. If the world has a purpose, then it has nothing to do with us. If the world has a purpose which has nothing to do with us, then we'll never know what it is. Think about it this way. What is the purpose? Now, there are these good bacteria living in our guts. What is the purpose of their life? If you ask them, like, well, okay, they have their own world, and maybe their world their whole lives are spent in our intestines. So what is the purpose of your world? And, well, we don't know what they'll say. Maybe if they have some idea of karma, they'll say, well, we're just working out our karma here. Uh, uh, but what is the purpose of their life and existence from our perspective? It's clear from our they serve. We will say, well, these good bacteria are serving our purpose. We know that they produce natural antibiotics and acids and hydrogen peroxide. I'm just reading all this because I'm not an expert in this. And we know that they protect us against infection from harmful microorganisms, and they prevent food poisoning. So they do a lot of good. So we will say, well, the purpose of their life is to help us and protect us. While from their perspective, their purpose might be very different. So now, looking at that, I'd say the world is very self-referential. So when we see something like that, we might ask ourselves, so what is the purpose of my life? What if I'm like a bacteria in some big organism's guts? And so we are thinking about my prarabdha karma and my enlightenment, but maybe we are serving some purpose of some larger being. Because for all we know, we don't even know whether these good bacteria within us, they are even aware that they are inside some bigger being. And so we might well be. In fact, that is exactly what the Upanishads say, that as long as we continue in our present identity as these mortal human beings, we are probably serving someone else's purpose. We know that in life, while living, we help to perpetuate this creation, and in death, we fertilize the plants. The bodies become again return to dust and ashes. So we are serving, fulfilling the purpose of a larger material universe as human beings. Through rituals and offerings that are done, in fact, in some of the Vedic rituals, they used to make this oblation saying, Indraya Swaha, Varunaya Swaha. So all these, the different deities were nothing but the personification of the powers of nature and making offerings to them. And then the mythologies describe how all of these offerings that are made ritually are in some subtle way go to these different celestial beings and feed them. So it's not just like you're pouring something into the ghee and that's it. In a very subtle form of it goes to these beings in the celestial world, and they depend on us to do this. And so the Upanishads say that all human beings, the word that they use is a jantu. So we might think we are very civilized creatures and on topmost of the evolutionary ladder, but as far as the celestial beings are concerned, we are just like their insects, trying to do a greater purpose of making sure that all the celestial offerings go to them. And so we could be just microorganisms into this larger world, whose extent, even at this material level, we are not able to know. And forget about the subtle levels of this world. So it's beyond our comprehension. Now, only when we realize that our present identity may not be our true identity, then only we realize that our own existence may have its own purpose. Rather than fulfilling nature's purpose or fulfilling someone else's purpose, we might have our own purpose. That's something, what if the bacteria within us begin to think, the purpose of my life is not simply to digest the food for this person, but my life has some purpose too. Something like that kind of an awakening should occur. I know it's not a very pleasant thought to think of ourselves as just like being a bacteria. But again, we are just trying to be now logical about the whole thing. Now, these are the kind of questions, therefore. What is my true identity? Does my life have a purpose of its own, or am I fulfilling some larger purpose outside of myself, which is not dependent on the world? Now, these are the kind of questions we'll try to explore next Sunday. Questions about who we are, what the purpose of our own life is. Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. So next Sunday, as I said, our topic will be questions about me, and we'll try to discuss, we'll continue the discussion that we had now. On Wednesday, we will continue with the Vedanta study group. We'll reading of the Narada Bhakti Sutra on Wednesday evening at 7:30. And on Tuesday and Saturday, our Arati and meditation will also continue as usual. So we'll conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto us.